This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Adam Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic preamp into the Empirical Labs EL8X distressor mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Adam Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show, and we really appreciate it. Now, get ready to rock.
Other tools that I use are my iPhone. That's the new NS10. Just the iPhone speaker, make sure that I can hear all the elements, and especially low, and listening low is a great way to check something out. It really helps you hear whether the vocal is present as it should be and whether anything else is competing with it. It becomes really evident when you listen to something low where those vocals are sitting.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. No matter what style of music you create, Native Instruments provides you all the instruments you need, from drums, loops, and beats to vintage and modern synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I really enjoy recording real bands in my studio, but then adding amazing overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, or Hybrid keys. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get complete start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. Are you struggling to make your mixes sound professional? If your tracks feel weak, distant, or lack punch and clarity, I've got the perfect solution. My free course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will teach you how to achieve pro-level mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. But these techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you use Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or another. If you're ready to make your best record ever, go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now for free. Find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Harold LaRue, a Grammy-winning mastering engineer in Houston, Texas. Harold's recent clients include contemporary jazz masters, the Wayne Shorter Quartet, Terri Lynn Carrington and Joey Alexander, synth sorceress Lisa Bella Donna, and R&B legend Jeffrey Osborne. Harold has worked as a software engineer, a pro audio service manager, theatrical sound engineer, and restaurateur, and was the monitor engineer for the Houston Symphony Orchestra before leaving to focus on his growing mastering business. As an audio educator, Harold has also developed and taught studio production and mastering courses at universities and recording schools across the country. He continues to present public workshops and teach privately. And of course, he's joining us right here on the podcast. He's a voting member of the Recording Academy Producers and Engineers Wing, Audio Engineering Society, and the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Check out our previous interview on episode RSR463 to learn more about Harold's backstory. And I want to dedicate this episode, actually, to the late, great audio designer and engineer Glenn Coleman, whom Harold introduced me to at NAMM in 2020. And I'm very glad that I got a chance to meet Glenn and chat with him. So, dedicating this episode to Glenn. Please welcome Harold LaRue to Recording Studio Rockstars. Harold, are you ready to rock, my friend?
You're darn tootin'.
Yeah. Sorry, that was probably an emotional moment there. But I was remembering as I was getting ready for the podcast, our interactions in the past. And then I remembered that, we had a chance to chat with Glenn Coleman at the Coleman Audio booth at NAMM in 2020. And he was awesome and just had this amazing history with MCI, as an MCI console owner myself, it was just so cool to hear all that stuff.
Yeah, he was a legend. He was missed at NAMM this year.
Yeah, indeed. Yep. Indeed. Well, Harold, it's good to have you back on the show, man. Nice to see you. I think I sort of caught you from afar when we were at NAMM this past year. But so it's a busy world. A lot of people coming and going. And with a cool haircut like yours, it was easy to spot you going down the escalator. So tell us what's new with you, man. I know that since the last time we spoke, when we did this last interview, you sort of gave us your backstory and talked about how you got into all this. So we can just kind of jump right in today. But you've done a bunch of new upgrades and things like that at your studio, right? So what's new with you at your place?
Tons. I've upgraded just about everything. I upgraded my studio. I have a home-based studio, and we moved from more central Houston to North Houston.
Houston's kind of a huge place, isn't it?
It's enormous.
Yeah.
It's a bit like three.
Is it like bigger than Los Angeles, or is it sort of similar?
Which part of it?
Is it bigger? Is it sort of similar to Los Angeles, where it's just like for a vast?
Yeah, it's a big
grid
sprawl.
Of streets?
It's definitely a driving city, and Harris County is the largest county in the U.S. that Houston's a part of. So it's enormous. Yeah.
So you guys moved up across town, got set up in a whole new home studio.
We moved north, and we bought a house, and I went from a cramped little room in our last place, a rental, to a big second floor loft, and I have room for everything, including my mains speakers. Before, I didn't have room for these guys, and I was just using my Pro X Studio 100s and a subwoofer. And here I was able to open it up, and I've got two, they're called SA M57s, and they're huge planar ribbon style, tweeter-driven mains, and I've got a pair of active subwoofers with them as well.
Is that kind of like Martin Logan's? Aren't those planar ribbon speakers as well?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I haven't seen many. I know Odyssey headphones are sort of, well, no, they're a little different actually.
Those heads, right? Don't the heads use?
Yeah, I think their drivers are electrostatic or something.
Yeah,
like
right.
That.
Very nice. And I just love them. No fatigue. And it's just great. I'm so grateful to have a room. This is the best room I've ever been in. I had a pretty good one in Louisville, Kentucky. I got it dialed in so that I didn't have to use any room correction software there. And here I've got it semi-dialed in, and I only turn that on when I absolutely have to. It's pretty good. But the beauty about having a second floor loft is that you don't need a ton of low frequency trapping, because the way I have it set up, the speakers are pointed to the railing and out into the living room below. All the bass goes there and never comes back.
So the first mastering studio I ever worked with was like that. Jim DeMaine had this little room up there, but my back, if I was sitting behind him, my back was or his back just looked right out into the loft space. Right. And I did not, that makes perfect sense now, but I didn't know anything about that kind of stuff back then.
Yeah, it's a huge improvement. I do have a couple of front corner bass traps that I made, and some first reflection absorption, but for the most part, that's it. I've got carpet over most of it right now, but all the bass goes into the living room and throughout the house and never returns.
So that's a really clever point too, to just reiterate for the rock stars, is this idea of like where to set up a controller and where to set up your speakers in a house. I think instinctively we might think, oh, they need to be closed off from everything else. And you might put yourself in a small room when in fact, maybe it's just as easy to put yourself in a big room and have all that extra space. And so why is that? Why is the extra space so helpful?
Well, it especially depends on how loud you monitor, how active you're making that room, and how poorly designed or treated it is. If you're really jamming some speakers in a small room, it won't take much to activate all of that room's, warts and hideous features. If you keep it low, you with some basic first reflection stuff, you're fine. But when you start cranking it up and the room starts affecting your low frequency tones, and you're getting a lot of bumps and valleys, those are really hard to fix. And in a more open environment, especially if you don't have a back wall like I don't, there's nothing for the sound to reflect back. Of course, in smaller rooms, the sound moves past your head to the wall behind you, bounces back to you, and is bouncing in a million other directions. But what's happening is you're getting some weird phase issues when they both combine at your head. Mm-hmm. So that's why you'll find a lot of back walls in studios are just many, many feet of absorptive material, like fiberglass and other things. It's because they want that bass information to be absorbed and to never come back at you. Or
right,
to
send
be
it
diffused
out of the speaker, but have it not reflect.
That's right. And so with a smaller room, it's a bigger problem. And especially if you work with larger speakers or work at louder volumes, you're activating all those resonances and issues with the room. So the bigger the room, the less of a problem it is. Probably introduces its own problems, but I think bigger is better in most cases.
Right. Well, so rooms have a modal frequency. It's like, I'm going to butcher the math, but what is it? Half the wavelength or something like that. Is the length of the room is half the wavelength of the lowest frequency fundamental. And as you do a bigger room, it's like you're lowering and lowering and lowering that fundamental frequency. And ideally, if you can drop it down into, 20 hertz in the sub range, then it's no longer competing with your audio perception,
Yeah. And you just went through all of that yourself, right? GIK?
No, Carl Tatz.
Oh, Carl Tatz. That's right.
And he did my room. And I didn't change my room. So we did a lot of treatment, but we did much more treatment than I had in there originally. And I couldn't do many feet of insulation on the back wall, but instead we just did many inches of 703.
There you go.
So it's maybe 6 inches deep or something like that on a couch. And it made a huge difference. It's so much fun to work in there now.
Oh, man, I can't wait to visit and hear that.
Yeah, well, I look forward to having you come visit. All right, so you mentioned your speakers, and you said, what did you say, SM or SAM 57s or something like that?
Yeah, SA is Stage a Company, and they're from the Netherlands. They were known for some very distinctive PA cabinets. They designed these blue PA cabinets. Prince used to use them. They were used at the Blue Note Club in New York, and you'd see them hanging over the stage and things of that nature. And so I happened to come upon a pair in Oklahoma. I met a guy who was at one time a dealer, my buddy Russ, and he wanted to build a recording studio at one time, and learned that they were making studio speakers. They had made a line of studio and sort of mastering grade speakers. And so he got a pair. He wanted to create a studio. I think he did one project and realized he did not want to run a recording studio. So I think that's, and so he just put them right back in the road cases, and there they sat until I came along.
Right on.
And I really lucked out.
Just to clarify, so you said ribbon planar. So if we're new to this, traditionally a speaker is a cone, and in the center of the cone, it's pushing the cone with a magnet back and forth. But there's ribbon speakers, like for example, Adam Audio has a corrugated ribbon tweeter.
Yeah.
And then there are the Martin Logans that I mentioned. And I think if I heard you correctly, yours are also ribbons for the drivers.
That's right. They're ribbon. I think, though, to get the highest output, that there's a planar style of ribbon driver that is very very super clean and can really get some SPLs out in a compact driver, and that's what they call these drivers. They call them their compact ribbon drivers.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it's like a plane, a flat plane that's
right.
vibrating back and forth to push the
air.
air.
I think so.
That's wild. It's fun to think about like all the different ways that we could make sound, speakers.
Yeah.
I mean, my voice talking is vocal cords resonating, going through the larynx and coming out sounding hopefully like great voices on your radio, rock stars. All right, cool. So what else is new with your studio?
Oh my gosh. So right, we moved, got a new studio space, was able to put my mains up. Then I just kept looking for my weakest links, and just going for those. I instead of a mono subwoofer with the Studio 100s with the ProX, I went with stereo active subwoofers. So that was the first one. Now I've got full stereo, three-way sound, full range sound coming. And the next one was my computer. I had been using a Hackintosh I'd been milking that thing for about 10 years. And finally one day it just would not take Mac updates. And I was having CMOS issues because the motherboard was getting old, and it was just time to switch it up. And plus, running a Hackintosh. Go ahead.
For the rock stars who don't know, what's a Hackintosh?
Oh, so a Hackintosh is a PC computer, normally like Windows components off the shelf. You go to your computer store or whatever, and you buy the motherboard, you buy the power supply, you buy the chassis, you buy the hard drives, a video card, any kind of internal sound card you need, and slap it together. Well, normally you'd put Windows on that or Linux or something, but you can run these. I think the website's called TonyX86.com. I'll have to look at that and make sure it's right. And they have little patches that you can run on and install Apple OS X on this Windows machine. You basically trick OS X into thinking this is an Apple hardware, including serial numbers and everything. They have it all worked out. But it can be a little bit tricky to get set up. But you can get a smoking machine together, with a little elbow grease and probably a third to a quarter of what you would pay for equivalent Apple hardware.
Chris Salim, over at Mixdown Online, he also was doing the Hackintosh for a little while, and it's just a fascinating idea. I mean, I never messed with it, but for those of us who are feeling adventurous, it probably is a pretty fun thing to figure out, and you really can make a very powerful computer. You get your budget gets a lot of bang,
Sure does. And another Chris is doing it, Chris Shaw.
Yeah.
In Austin.
That's right. Yeah. He's doing it too.
And Mick Gazowski.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
But so now you've switched back to straight up Mac.
Yeah, I have. I went with the M1 Mini was coming out at that time. So it was really kind of bleeding edge at the time. I wasn't sure how my software was going to work with it. But I went for it. I also had to change the interface I was using. And I got a Lynx Hilo interface. So that just connects via Thunderbolt to the M1. So I got this compact little setup. It's great. And I went with the OWC STX little hard drive caddy thing that sits right under it, and I'm rocking and rolling. So it was really pretty easy to get everything set up, and it's been super stable since day one. I didn't even have to use Rosetta for any real length of time. all the manufacturers just came out, they were ready for it. They knew it was coming out, so.
Yeah. Adam Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin by unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White A4V and A7V, available for a limited time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Yeah, the SDX is a cool box. I've had that in my studio as well because it matches the shape of the Mac Mini.
Exactly, yeah.
But mine actually mine actually zapped. I think maybe, I don't know if it was the power or something, and I had to replace it. But I actually replaced it with another OWC dock because it's nice to have a breakout with the additional USB-C Thunderbolt.
Yeah, for sure. And I had one die as well, but it was 7 months after the warranty expired.
Bummer.
So I know, and they were like, "Nope, sorry." But I just love it so much that I just bought another one anyway. So it didn't matter.
Well, it was a pretty cool box because it's got it can host 2 drives inside, and it also gives you like multiple breakouts for USB and USB-C Thunderbolt.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So let's see, what other stuff? Like what's part of now you've got your desk in front of you, which is sort of like a classic mastering desk with real low profile with just a few pieces of hardware.
Exactly. So one of the other things I updated was, and we can talk about this in a minute too, is I updated DAWs.
What are you working on?
I was capturing my chain with Pro Tools before, and I think I was using Hoffa software to assemble CDs. And I switched to Wavelab when I think it was version 10. They were able to simultaneously play back and record. Seems like it should.
Right.
It seems like it should be simple, but it took them a while to get there. But as soon as that was available, I was able to pitch through my analog chain, catch through it, and continue working and on the album and assemble it from there as well. So it was super handy. I didn't have to jump back and forth between 2 different applications, and it's been great.
Now, so in my experience, when I go work with a mastering engineer who's doing that, it's typically the first step in a process, right? It's like figure out what analog thing are we going to do, send it out through Gear, re-sample it, which might does that actually give us a benefit of getting a higher quality A to D at that point?
It can. So you can take something that's, let's say, 16-bit 44K, pitch it through an analog system, and capture it at any bit depth and sample rate that you want. So yeah, you can, and what that'll also do is the analog realm will allow some of your peaks to be rebuilt. So if you were sent a really crushed, mix, by putting it through an analog chain, you can give it some of that hair back and that air, and then again, you're capturing it all at a higher, resolution, higher detail. So it's win-win.
So that's fascinating. Now, you would have to use 2 separate DAWs or 2 separate interfaces for that?
Nope.
So you could actually just same interface, but you're just playing, the first file's just coming out from a 44.1 16-bit source.
Yeah, it can. Now, some interfaces will let you do multiple sample rates. I think that the merging stuff does. I think it lets you pitch out at, say, 1644 and capture it, 2496 or whatever you're doing. I tend to take whatever I have. It depends on if the client has issues with this or not, but I tend to take everything in and upsample it to 32-bit floating point and 96K. If it comes in, much lower than that. If it were 88.2, I'd probably just leave it there. But because I am using one computer and one interface, and I do have it locked to one sample rate, so I'm getting the source material up to that rate, pitching it through and recapturing it at 96K.
So that's very interesting. So like if we're so a typical scenario for me might be wanting to do some things at 3296, but then, building a large mix and going and realizing, you know what, I'm going to stay at 4824 because it's a lot easier to get the project done.
Sure.
But what I've never considered is, could I bounce a mix at 2448 and then actually run it back out through something in a 3296 session and run it through some analog gear and resample it, and might I like the results?
Well, let us know how you
That's cool, man. I got to experiment with that. That's a cool experiment.
So I got to say, that leads directly into one of the other huge upgrades, and that was an upgrade in my workflow, because I used to massage the file a little bit. Maybe if it needed to be de-essed, I would de-ess it. If it needed some, just any little tweaking, I would do that and then pitch that through the analog chain and capture it. And then sometimes I'd find that I'd have to do the same thing. If the chain didn't correct, if it added something to the S's or took it away, or I would find myself having to retouch it again somehow digitally. Not all the time, but occasionally. And so I happened to see my buddy Jeff Ott of London Bridge Studios in Seattle. He had, I don't know that he has it anymore, but he had a YouTube channel, YouTube feed, I think, and I saw an episode with Amy Dragon. Amy Dragon is a mastering engineer based in Portland. And she happened to be, I think she does some mastering for him, and they were going over a project they'd worked on together. And I noticed that Amy said that she pitches her projects through the chain first and then touches them. If, does anything that she needs to do de-ess or some EQ or anything. And her reasoning was that her chain is, she spent a long time curating that chain and learning what it does and learning what different options do and what combinations. And it's true, they can solve so many problems. So why not just trust your chain to do what it does? And if something else needs to be done, then you can do it. But you don't have to mess with it ahead of time. Just put it through your chain and then deal with anything. If you need to denoise something, then you're denoising not only the original program material, but what your chain may have added to it. The noise floor of your chain. So you're only denoising once. You're only de-essing once.
So you're saying the recommendation is run it through the analog stuff first, then start doing the digital tweaks.
Yeah, because you may also find, some clients will want a revision that if maybe you had de-essed it and you took too much out. I've had that where a Spanish dialect suddenly sounded like a different region, and I had taken too much S out, I think. So had I done that before I pitched it through the chain, I would then have to do that whole process over. I'd have to go undo it, pitch it through the chain, and then, re-render everything. But if I just start with my chain, very, very infrequently would I have to re-pitch it, unless somebody sent me a new mix, right? And that happens. That happens. Yeah. And then you're only running one song, through it, and not the whole program.
All right, cool. So that's a good takeaway. So start by, if we're going to do this experimenting with the analog treatment before doing work after it, it's do the analog first, print it, then start doing your digital stuff. And I think that's what I've seen on some sessions I've been on too. Now, what about, let me ask you a dumb question. We probably asked you this before, but de-essing in mastering, like when we think about, we want to experiment, maybe we're messing with it and we think we want to try that. What, do you just simply use a de-esser? I mean, I know that my BrainWorks V2 plugin, for example, from Plugin Alliance has got a de-esser knob on it, but I'm not entirely sure, how much de-essing it's doing or whatever. I mean, I certainly know I've got like the 902 de-esser, and would you be likely to put just a straight up de-esser on a master, or are there very specific mastering focused de-essers?
Well, this is actually something that I spend a lot of time on because I have to approach it sometimes 4 different ways, not on the same project, but I have several different ways I might approach de-essing. One, it doesn't need de-essing at all, right? It's perfect. The mix engineer did a great job with the balances. The next level of de-essing, I would reach for a de-essing plugin. Again, after it's gone through my chain can fix a lot of issues, especially with harshness, and it can tone some of that stuff down. But if there's any left, I can put a plugin. I was really into the FabFilter Pro DS. And then I started using the Softtube Vice DS plugin. And golly, that one's really good. That was really impressive. And super easy to set up, too. Lots of options, but I know they have the bigger DS1 sort of module that mimics the original hardware, but this is just the DS portion of it, which I'm fine with. But that one, it works really, really well. I've bought and tried several others, the Sonox and the DMG Audio one, and the Vice DS seems to be just most transparent, I'd say. But I really, really did like the way the FabFilter de-esser worked. I loved the interface. I love the way I can take little sliders and choose an area. I liked it. And then, okay, so if none of that works, or if it's not enough, then I'll simply open up my captured file and put it in Isotope RX.
Oh, tell us about Isotope RX.
Oh my gosh, I can't live without that. I use Isotope RX to do my initial upsampling, if needed. So from a mix up to my 3296.
Oh, so you'll record it right into RX when you're capturing it?
No. So what I'll do is I'll be given the mixes. Let's say they're 2448, and I want to prep them for my chain. I'll upsample them to 32. Basically, I just drop them into Isotope RX, into its batch converter, and then tell it I want to spit it out at 32-bit floating point and 96K. And it's got really, really great sampling options, and it's really, really good quality. So that's what I'm using that for on that end.
So let me interject that because I want to make sure I was clear. So earlier when I was talking about you can do a 1644-1 in the same session, run it out and come back in, what I was forgetting was if you're using Pro Tools, for example, you'd have to make a 3296 session and you'd drop this 1644-1 file into that session. Well, then Pro Tools would convert it. And instead, you're choosing RX to convert it first, where you can just load it into the session. It's going to be a perfect match.
Exactly.
Does it give you a lot of, are there a lot of decisions you have to make about inside it, like in the advanced settings or anything, or is it just pretty straightforward?
I don't, but I also used some settings that someone recommended. I'll have to dig for it and send you a link to it. But somebody made some really funky presets for the resampler, and so I've been using those. They seem to work really well, but there's no reason why you couldn't just use the basic settings. I think I just got a little tweaky with these, and I just set it and forget it from there.
Right on. So RX, of course, does all kinds of amazing magic tricks. I've done some de-essing in RX myself where I thought I loaded it in and you can see the S's, especially if you're working on a vocal or on a mix that's just a little out of hand. And what was fascinating to me is you could make decisions to go through and sort of, fade out where the S is across the full spectrum, or you could go in and just sort of draw a loop around like the lower mids where the kind of the ch stuff is, but maybe leave the top if you wanted.
Exactly. And
so that's a thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I have to do that all the time. So yeah, you'll go into the spectral repair part of RX, and I choose the rectangle tool and attenuate. There's a way to at the very bottom you can hit the I button and it'll automatically process whatever you select. So at the bottom, I have attenuate selected, and over in the spectral repair settings, I've got it set to 0.1, basically the lowest setting I can for the amount of attenuation that's going to happen. And 9 out of 10 times, that's enough. And so you're right. You just see these blooms, these bright blooms in the spectral editor, and you just
Rockstar, she's making hand gestures like jellyfish, like audio jellyfish in the ocean.
So you just put your rectangle around that, boom, done. If it didn't quite get it, if it needs more, do it again.
Hey, rock stars. Yeah, I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make sure every episode of this podcast sounds great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, De-ess, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from iZotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Light along with many of the other free cool plugins over at iZotope.com. Now, let me ask you some dumb questions about RX because I love it so much and I'm always fascinated by what it can do. But when I get there, I'm often in a hurry. And then I think, geez, I really wish I knew how to navigate better in RX because I know how to get around Pro Tools. But when I go over there, I'm sort of like, I'm like a beginner again, like any of us using an app where we don't use it all the time. So do you have any tips for any of that? Do you just sort of instinctively key command your way around RX now having used it so much?
I think I use one of those Kensington trackballs that have a little like what do you call a little?
Is it the turbo mouse? That's what I've got with the ring and the
it's got the ring. Sorry, that's what I was trying to think of. So it's got this little control ring around the trackball, and I can use that depending on my my control key, whether it's control.
Oh, right. So if you shift and do it, it sort of moves everything left to right. And if you
exactly.
do one of the modifier keys, it'll zoom up and down or in and out.
So I just do that. I've got my left hand on those 3 keys, and I just move my way around, and it's very intuitive, and you just get in the zone, right? Yeah. You just start doing it.
All right. So let me ask you another dumb question. If I'm in Pro Tools and I hit play and I'm listening and the cursor has now like moved off the screen to the right so I can't see it, the play bar. If I just drop an arrow, I can stop and then now I know right where I stopped and I can go right to that sound or that point. Is there some way that you do that in RX as well?
Yeah, I just hit the M button for marker. Is that what you mean? Drop a marker there?
So like, you just, if it's playing and it's off screen, you just hit the M button to drop a marker and then stop. And then how do you navigate to the M? Just arrow over or something like that? Or you just look for it?
I just look in there's sort of a universal view, an overview at the top, and you can find them that way. It'll show it to you. But strangely, it only shows you the marker when you're sort of in that zone. It's kind of hard to find them a little bit. It's not a very intuitive marker system, I have to say. And to change, to add a name to the marker, because they come up, I think just marker 1, marker 2, to change it, you have to actually open a marker window up and edit the name of it instead of just double-clicking the name as it is in your timeline and changing it. So that's a bit of a bummer, but it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, well, that's cool. So it's always good to hear. I know it sounds like such a nerdy question, but when we do this stuff, like a lot of this stuff is the stuff that makes us get into a flow or get frustrated are pretty nerdy details, right? We're like, how do I go from here to, how do I pick this thing up and just put it over here, you know?
And I just want to reiterate what you said about the top and the bottom half of an S.
Yeah.
Because it's so important. If you take the whole S out, if you take from, you'll see some blooms pretty low, but if you take them from the 1K above, the whole thing, then you can just dull it out. But if you only take the bottom part of that S, you leave a bright openness to it, and a wispiness to it, and it gives you the indication the S is there, but it's taking that out of it.
Right,
so,
right.
Brilliant. So I applaud that.
Like the mid-range nastiness.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. The more you get into paying attention to S's, you realize that like there's S, there's ch, there's sh.
Yeah.
There's like all these different frequency ranges of different fricatives.
Oh.
And consonants, I guess, right? It's probably mostly fricatives, isn't it?
You must be an English major.
I don't know. I'm making this shit up right now.
Hey, I want to say one more thing about de-essing. So I've been doing all of this in the box, right? But I decided to add a hardware de-esser. Those Maslach MPLs are just really amazing. They're limiters and high frequency limiters, but I went with but those are getting really, really hard to find, and I'm not sure how many will be made going forward. So I went with the Empirical Labs de-essers, and those are 500 series de-essers, and they came from the de-esser in their channel strip. They have a channel strip that's got a mic pre. Maybe it's called the mic E or something, but it's got a de-esser in it. And so what they did is took that and refined it. They were able to put it in a much bigger space, right? They had a larger card that they could build that circuit on. And I know that Dave said that he spent a lot of time on the layers of the circuit board and the ground planes and keeping it super quiet. And so it's an improvement on that. And I just like the way it works in two different ways. So a typical high frequency limiter you'll set a frequency point, and anything above it, if it goes past the threshold, it'll start reducing that whole area. But they have a second mode that listens to the amount of that high frequency compared to the program material. And it doesn't matter how, it doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to approach your threshold at all for it to say, there's too much high frequencies here, and bring it down. Yeah. It can be an S that's happening in a really quiet part of the song, and it recognizes that that's just too much. And it has a couple of controls. It has a threshold control, it has a frequency, so you can dial in the frequency range that you want it. But that's a really interesting thing, because you don't want it to just grab everything that's bright up there. But they've done the math and came up with a tuned circuit that will listen and hopefully pick out what's too much.
Yeah, that's super cool, and that's such an interesting reminder that, when a voice is loud or quiet, it could still sound like it's too much S.
That's right.
And if you set one threshold like a compressor, it's only going to work above that. The DBX 902 also had a circuit in it that I think it like sort of compressed everything so that you could just sort of see where the S was sticking out, no matter whether it was loud or soft. It's just a clever idea. And Dave Durr is a super genius. Rockstars, if you have not had a chance to use any of the Empirical Labs hardware or software yet, you gotta. That's all I gotta say. You gotta do it. It's the sound. It has been for a long time. I remember when the Distressor showed up in the first studio I was at, and we're all just like, holy shit. You're playing with that thing, getting crazy drum sounds, getting crazy sounds for everything.
Well, that's quite a chameleon compressor too, because it's you can make it sound like just about anything. So I use these. I've got them in a horizontal rack. They sell it with a horizontal faceplate. So I just have it in a 1-unit 3-space 500 series rack, and I have 2 of them. And I also run them in mid-side. So I built a little box using Wayne Kirkwood's boards that he sells. He's out in Dallas, and he makes a nice little compact MS board that I just put it in a 1U rack and have it connected. So I've got a couple of things going through that, and then suddenly I have an MS section of my chain now, which is great.
So let's make sure we clarify that. So you're taking analog signal, converting it into mid-side encoded. So instead of left-right, it sort of mixes them together and does a minus kind of thing where you're left with a channel that's everything that's just up the middle, and you're left with a channel that is just what's on the sides, even though it's just one channel. That's what's so clever about MS.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you with this tiny little board, it will do that encoding and decoding process. So I have it in a little switcher, again, one of Wayne's insert switcher boards that he makes. They're just super cool, and you can totally make these yourself. So I have an API 2500 on the insert switch. I can bring that in and out of the chain. And then I've got an MS circuit that I can bring in and out of the chain. And that's going to another insert switcher that has the de-essers on it. And so I can bring them in or out. And it also has my Retro 2A3 2-channel Pultec style EQ. So I with that little MS box, I was able to just double or triple the usefulness of that 2-channel EQ, because it's 2 discrete channels. It's not linked in any way. So I just turned it into an MS EQ, and it's brilliant.
That's cool. So then you can affect what's going on the sides differently from what's happening up the center. And just for a quick breakdown, what are the kind of things we're likely to find in the center versus on the sides? What, musically, what are you looking for?
Right. So the stuff in the center is normally a lead vocal, kick, snare, very often the bass. You might find if someone's recorded a bunch of guitars and they're layering, that they will still put some guitars in the middle instead of just, washing them off to the sides. To get a giant sound, they'll sneak one right up the middle too. And so those are the kind of things that you'll find there. And it's just really helpful, especially, let's say I wanted to de-ess just the vocal. Well, I'd run it through the MS chain, and I use that first de-esser. Now the channel 1 de-esser is now the mid de-esser. So that's the only one I have to engage. I don't have to engage a stereo de-esser for just this mid tracks. I can leave the sides totally alone. I don't have to worry about the cymbals or the guitars getting dull. I can just pop it
now,
in there.
If you were doing some de-essing over an RX, would you have that same option to just de-ess the midsection?
I normally run it in a combined mode, so I see both left and right together. So I guess that's kind of seeing the middle in a weird way, but often you'll have to split it out into left. I split it out into left, right. I've never split it. That's a good trick. Maybe. I guess
it's a fair question. Maybe you just haven't. It's like RX does what it does for what you need. And
I'm gonna look at that next time I crack it open. But normally I'll just combine the views that way, because I'm doing it. I can be doing it for hours, right? For a whole album, you might, and you're also looking for little like guitar squeaks and thumps and other things. You get those while you're in there as well. So I could manually isotope de-ess something and spectrally repair something like for 3 hours for a whole album.
Wow.
Just stepping through it bit by bit, if I had to.
Yeah. Now, do you find two things? One is, do you find that some of the automatic tools for doing that are also still really useful, or do you find, or is it one of those things like, early quantizing drums where you're like, look, you're going to have to go through it manually, so you might as well just do it manually?
I don't do any automatic tools just because I want more control over what's going on.
Right.
I don't want to have to guess if a tool did something to a part that, by the time I get to it, maybe I don't know that it was altered. So I do everything manually and intentionally. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then what about you just going through the process of like, is that squeak, should I get rid of that squeak, or is that squeak supposed to be in there, sort of thing? That must be a question that goes through your head.
Yeah, so I'm pretty careful about that. If very often removing a squeak can remove, sometimes that's a rhythm element, right? That your fingers are moving and you squeak on a note or something, so it sounds odd.
What about Seether by Veruca Salt? It's got no, no.
Exactly. So you don't want to RX that out.
Sorry, this is what happens, man. I interject my dad jokes, and then it just throws everybody
and
off.
Then you blew my brain away. What was I talking about?
You were talking about the making conscious decisions about what to remove versus maybe it should be in there.
Oh, yeah. So, you'll kind of get, after you do it for a little while, you'll kind of get a gut feeling about, should I take it out? And very often I'll just reduce it. I might hit it once or twice with that de-esser setting, 0.1 setting, and just knock it down a little bit so it isn't drawing you don't want anything to draw your ear away from the lead vocal or the lead instrument. So that's what these squeaks often do, either right at the middle or on the sides or something. They just for a split second, they draw your ear away. So you have to just tamp it down. You don't have to remove it, but you can just tamp it down so it's no longer a distraction. And people generally appreciate that.
So, mastering process is a little different from production and mixing, but we use some of the same tools. RX, for example, Rockstars, if you're in your multi-track DAW, if you're in a Pro Tools session, for example, you can open the, I believe it's Audio Suite, it's Send to RX plugin. And what it does is you can select a clip now in Pro Tools. And I sort of have it as a single button click on my Stream Deck talking to SoundFlow. It's one of those very cool features of that.
Is that ARA?
Where I can, I don't think it's ARA in this case. Okay. What I do is I just select the clip, or I select the whole vocal track, and then I just hit the button, and it actually opens the plugin, sends it over to RX, opens RX, and now it's waiting for me there, and then I can work on it. And then RX has this great button in it where you just hit return, and it will just return it right back over to the Pro Tools session.
Oh, yeah.
And then the plugin in Pro Tools will say, it's this, I like your pitching and catching analogy. The catcher back in Pro Tools is like, all right, I got the ball. You want me to commit this thing? And then you just say commit, and it puts it right back into the track, right in place. So it's a great way to like take something over there, give it a quick, clean up, and then send it right back to where it was. And listen to see if you like it. There are other ways to use it from your DAW where you can actually route it. You can route the output of RX to go back into the same track in your mix on the session if you need to hear it in context of your Pro Tools mix, for example. So I'm just pointing these out just to kind of light up the light bulbs for the rock stars listening who are like, ooh, that sounds cool. I want to try that.
Yeah, it does sound cool.
Yeah, but RX is so cool. I mean, I don't know if you use, de-essing is this, but Larry Crane, I remember he brought up taking things over there to sort of paint out some of the frequencies across things. So you're almost like doing a little EQ carving of guitars that might have too much low end tone and stuff, and then send it back.
If I had a lot of time, I could totally mix in RX. You can totally, at least balances, for the most part. I find myself kind of doing that sometimes, It's really interesting.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, right on. What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM artists, TV and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need amazing sounds that instantly elevate our music to the desired style. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit, offering a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're into hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, dance beats, or orchestral arrangements, the Native Instruments Complete Bundle has it all. From drums, loops, and beats to synths, realistic strings, vintage bass, guitars, and keys, it's a comprehensive collection. I love recording real bands in my studio, but then enhancing the tracks with drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from battery, contact, Massive X, guitar rig, and hybrid keys, for example. It's a surefire way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. Adam Audio is celebrating 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Adam Audio are unveiling a special limited edition series of monitors that will look stunning in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series. Available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself, the clean, glossy white finish exudes a luxurious feel and will stand out in any studio or home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V retain the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Adam Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as cool as your music sounds. Don't miss out on the limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Hey, Rockstars are back now for the jam session, the second half of the show. My guest today is Harold LaRue, joining us from Texas. You ready to jam, dude?
I'm totally ready to jam.
So we were just starting to chat. I was like, we took a little screenshot so that, I could put that on Instagram or something of us doing the interview. And I was like, man, your camera looks good. And you were saying that it's your laptop. And I was like, are you working off a laptop for your mastering? So what were you going to say about that?
Yeah. So when I upgraded my computer to the M1 Mini, I knew that anytime I leave the studio, like if I go on a trip or go out of town for any length of time, I always get a mastering request. And so very often I just have to deal with it. And so when I upgraded the M1, I had to upgrade my laptop as well. So I got one of the MacBook Pros with the M1. I think it's the M1 Max or something. M1. So basically, it's an M1 derivative, but it's basically a clone of my existing system. Here, I have WaveLab installed and all my plugins and so forth. So it works really, really, really well.
Did you do a literal clone, or is it just you just installed the same stuff?
I just installed the same stuff.
What are the things? So that is going to sound really cool to people who might want to do that. What are the bumps in the road to watch out for when you try and do that?
Well, I guess the biggest bump or difference is going to be the fact that I won't have my analog gear along.
Right.
So I really don't need to bring a fancy interface along with me. I could just bring that. I have been toting the new Avid MBox Studio around. they sent me one to check out, and I've taken it to NAMM twice. I've done podcast interviews. I'm doing this one on it, and recorded overdubs and things on it. So I just stick it in a case and drag it around with me. It's super handy. It's a little Swiss Army box.
And then do you have to use lots of iLok plugins or anything like that, or not so much? I mean, I guess we use iLok Cloud now, so you don't even have to carry the thing with you.
Yeah, but I do. I just drag the iLok from my main computer along with me.
Yeah.
And, things that are on the iLok, I like the FabFilter Pro Q3. Use that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think the DMG plugins that I use their limiter plugin. So yeah, I'd say a lot of the plugins are still iLok based. Yeah.
Right on. All right. Well, let's see. We got lots to talk about, so let me keep jumping forward. Before we do anything, I just want to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Stephen Jones, aka Stone Cold. You don't know him by his nickname, who interned for me here at the Toy Box Studio and at the Bonnaroo Hay Bale Studio many years ago. And I think you guys recently started working together there too.
We did. He came to Houston and just hit the ground running. He's got a little production thing that he does, production company. And he also does a lot of live sound, which is big, big, big here in Houston.
That's awesome.
This is definitely a live sound city. So yeah, he's been great. I've done some mastering for him. And yeah, he mentioned that you guys knew each other.
Yeah.
That's great.
So shout out to you, Stone Cold.
Glad
you're here, man. Keep rocking.
He goes by Noodles now.
Oh, Noodles. That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right.
It must be a Cheech and Chong reference. I'm not sure.
I don't know. All right. So then one last thought before we jump into some of the records I wanted to talk about. When you were talking about all the external stuff and you're talking about mid-side, it reminded me that one of the things that we were talking about at Glenn Coleman Audio at the booth when we were at NAMM back in 2020 is the monitor controller that he made us, which was really like simple and elegant, and I think maybe passive as well.
Yeah. And in fact, that's what I use. Let's see. Let me see what it is.
All right, Roxas, this is where I go ding, 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 ding. He's looking. He's coming back. Here he is.
M3PH.
The M3PH.
Mark II. I think he had a Mark III where he upgraded he added a little more detail on the lowest end of the volume knob.
Cool. Well, so if I recall, You've got like physical switches for what input you're going to be listening to. You got physical switches for what output set of speakers you want to go to. I think at that NAMM one in the video we did, you even said one of the outputs could go up to an actual VU meter bridge that he made as well. That was amazing.
Yeah, you can use the third output either as a standalone output, or it can be a copy of whatever you're monitoring. So you can be watching some VU meters or something, or while you're working. So it's super, and that's what I do. I've got it going off to a little DK audio meter.
Yeah, actually, I'll interject a really useful scenario for that potentially is if you're doing screen capture kind of stuff, if you're one of the people who's trying to do a video and actually record what you're listening to for the video, by having that additional output, you can run that into an input of something.
Sure.
And capture your stereo bus. Sometimes a little easier than doing it, internally and digitally. But that's a whole rabbit hole we don't have to go down. The other thing that I remember from the video and your explanation of it was that you could hit the switches. You could do a mono switch on there to listen to your mix in mono, or you could hit the switches with a phase thing and you could hear the mid or the side while you're working. So a combination of the two. So there's a mute left and right. Let me take a look again. Ding, 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 ding. He's looking, Rockstars. He's looking. He's checking it out. He's hitting the button. He's coming back. Okay. So there's a mono switch, and then individual left and right mutes, and then there's a polarity flip switch. But if you push them both in, I think you can listen to the sides alone. But there's no configuration to listen to the mids alone. So okay,
you get what you get.
Okay, all right. How do you listen to your mid versus your side? Do you just do that digitally inside the computer when you want to hear one or the other? Because you're going out through your analog that way.
Yeah,
but you can just
I have to use something on the end of it to mono it.
Okay,
and I really like that the Sonox does a really cool. Oh gosh, what's it called?
There he goes again.
Sorry,
he's bringing
everything is within reach.
It's like virtual reality.
Listen Hub, Sonox Listen Hub.
Oh, Listen Hub is badass.
Really cool, really bad. So I use Listen Hub when I don't have all these meters around me on the road with my laptop. I've got an iPad with Listen Hub on it, and I run it on the MacBook, and it shows me. It's just a control center, an audio control center, all in one. I can solo low, mid, high frequencies. I can listen in mid, side, mute, dim, multiple sources, see a frequency, graph going on. Super, super neat. Not, way less than $100, probably less, 50 or less.
Yeah.
For this just super useful tool.
Yeah. So it's the version that I'm using, which is maybe the same thing. It's a app that I can install that doubles as a plugin, I think. But what it does is it runs sort of on the top of my Mac up in the menu bar up top, and I can listen to Listen Hub, and so I can route things over to that, so that then it talks to my iPhone or my iPad that I'm holding in my hand and gives me the buttons. So I can actually, you can set up your workflow, rock stars, where you're working and you've got a complex mix in front of you. But right down next to you is a button on an iPhone. You just hit the button, and now you've just flipped between your mix versus your reference mix. You can flip to mono. You can flip to the mid, the side, right there with those buttons, and it gives you. And you can do filters. You could just like hear the subs only, and like kind of dial in your low end. So it's a really, really cool tool. I use it. I can't remember. I think I'm more likely to use it for mastering than when I'm mixing, just because I have an HDX Pro Tools. But the other thing that is cool is it can bring in an additional input, like you can be streaming Spotify over to it, or some other sound source if you want to spot check how your stuff is sounding against stuff that you can't download. In other words,
yeah, it's super flexible, super neat, and for the price, you just can't beat it. So shout out to Sonox.
All right. Moving on to important things like these amazing records you've been doing, Harold. Cool. So let me just jump right in and reference some of them. So Wayne Shorter, live at the Detroit Jazz Festival. These are going to be in our playlist, Rockstar, so you can just scroll down and click through, and we've got a playlist of all Harold's discography. Sounds killer. I highly recommend you check it out. This sounds amazing. What do you want to say about how they got that sound of the jazz ensemble? And what are some of the challenges to you about mastering a live recording versus a studio recording, for example?
Right. So this was recorded live at the Detroit Jazz Festival 2017. I'm not sure exactly. And so it was a live show. It was recorded multi-track, which was great.
Outdoor festival probably too?
Yeah, it's an outdoor jazz festival downtown, happens every year. And they were captured, and Wayne Shorter's live sound engineer was there, and he also was the one who mixed the multi-tracks. So his name's Rob Griffin, and he's been working with them for many, many, many years. He's both on the road and road management and studio recording and mixing, everything, all the stuff.
That's cool. Now, a couple of things when I think about that live outdoor stage, I think one of the things you're likely to discover when you listen to mics like that is that everything sounds a little bit dead, right? Because unless you're hearing something slap back off a building, it's like you almost might as well be in an anechoic chamber or something recording everything.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing to hear microphones that have a little bit of air around them, because that air is an insulator, right? So that's just soaking it all up. It's great. I think didn't Led Zeppelin do some tracks outside of the barn?
Oh, I don't know.
In Sheffield, Sheffield Studios. I think they did at least one track outside, and they just wanted it super dead. They're like, okay, let's take it outside, and it's like super, super, super dead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's one of those things that you kind of like, oh, it's like a little light bulb moment. I mean, if you got a bunch of trucks going by, it's not going to work, rock stars. But if you happen to be out in nature somewhere where it's quiet everywhere else, try recording outside, because what happens is we're so used to the sound of sounds bouncing back at the microphone off the walls and interacting with that. And, sometimes you're in a big space recording. Sometimes you're in a home studio space, which is pretty small, and it's all kabong, off the walls. But stuff you definitely are likely to discover is drums sound very different when you don't have the reinforcement off the walls. Sometimes it's not at all what you want, and sometimes it's super cool. But those drums sound great, man.
Oh, yeah. Well, they were played by the master. Terri Lynn Carrington was there. She also produced that record, and this was on Candid Records. So worked really hard with her. She's very particular and a master at her craft. So I had to keep up with her, and it just turned out really well. Now Rob Griffin, the mixing engineer, has quite a process he goes through. He listens to every single track, and does phase alignment of every single track, especially for a live show.
Holy smokes. What does that even mean?
Well, what he'll do is he's got one of the radar recorders, and he'll take the original track, run it through some analog gear, clean it up, tune it up, sweeten it, do whatever it needs to be done. And then he will phase align that to the rest of the tracks he's already done. He uses a Little Labs IBP in between phase.
Go, Jonathan.
Yeah. And I think he also uses the VOG too. So Rob's out there using two of those Little Lab products. The VOG is the Voice of God bass processor. And, the bass players really love that. It's a pretty neat tool. So Rob will go through meticulously every single track, make sure it's phase aligned. And again, for a live show, things can be all over the place. So he makes sure things are tight that way. And then once he has and then he'll re-record it into the radar and take the place of the previous track. So once he gets everything phase aligned, then he can start the mix process. And everything's kind of been sweetened and fixed at that point, He's given every track care.
So if I'm following you, that might involve, say you decide that the overheads or an overhead mic, or maybe you just take two overheads and you run one of them through the IPP and you're adjusting it until you like the sound of both of them together, or something like that. And then you would go to the kick drum, and then you'd work with that against your reference. You have to have a benchmark track, I imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. You need to have a center there and align everything to it. Yep, exactly.
Wow. And so you just go through each one and just kind of keep adjusting it until you're like, I like that better. I liked where we started, but I like this better.
Yep. And then he commits it. Boom.
Wow.
So he goes through that whole process with every record that he works on. And by the time I get it, it's sounding pretty sweet. So my job at that point is just not to screw it up. So fortunately I didn't. And it was nominated for 2 Grammys and won one of them. So super happy about that. Yay.
That's great, man. Congrats.
And it was great. And Rob's dream to work with, so is Terri Lynn. And then I immediately worked on another album for Terri Lynn, a record that she made with, I think, her father and a couple other folks when she was 16. Terri Lynn Carrington is a force, audience, rock stars. She's a killer. So since 16, I mean, she's Buddy Rich's protege.
Wow.
When she was a kid, he just scooped her up, and she was a sponge. And now she teaches at Berklee College of Music and tours the world and produces albums. In fact, for one of the 2 Grammy nominations, the one that we lost, she won for her album of New Standards. I think it was called New Standards Volume 1 of female composers. But she was a producer on both records, played on both records, and won a Grammy for each one.
That's pretty amazing.
It's huge.
Very cool. All right. Well, let's see. let's talk about some other records you've done too. So, and the next one on the list I wanted to ask you about was Moogmentum with Lisa Bella Donna.
Yeah.
Great synth music. It's the track, at least in our playlist, is Moogmentum is, or maybe that was the album title, but the
both.
Yeah, the track is it's sort of ambient. It's arpeggiating, it's rhythmic, but it's not like, it's not a pumping dance floor beat. It's synth music to get lost in, like orchestral strings, and just kind of lean into. How is synth music different from acoustic recordings for you? Do you find it's easier or harder to record and master? And then I'll just hit you with all my questions around that.
Yeah.
And then what about from your perspective when you're working on stuff, analog versus plugins and digital virtual synths?
Yeah. So Lisa Bella Donna is, she works directly with Moog. And for these records, I think for at least one of them or two, she's gone to Moog headquarters. And they've set up a giant system for her. She tracks these. She's got videos of her playing. There are a couple of really cool YouTube videos of her playing, and they just sound amazing. She's an amazing musician and multi-instrumentalist, drummer, guitar player. When I met her, she was just a killer metal guitar player in the Columbus, Ohio scene where we were all hanging out. And
right on.
Just became this. Was always into tape machines and synthesizers, but then just blew up doing that. And so she's just cranking away and just has the coolest stuff. The hardest thing about synthesizer music is that synthesizers have just such a wide range.
Yeah.
From the lowest lows to the high, ultrasonic, range. So if every instrument, they just have to be well-crafted, well-balanced mixes and arrangements, right? And just like an orchestra, and that's kind of how I treat it like it's a symphony, because you are just all over the place with frequencies.
Yeah.
And they can be sweeping around your head and lots of fun effects and things. Fun fact, all of Lisa Bella Donna's arpeggios are done by hand. I want to say that she is.
What does that mean?
Just, you hear an arpeggio.
She's
well,
really
instead of just holding a chord down and having the synthesizer arpeggiate that for you, she just plays them all and just rips.
Wow.
And just rips. Watch some of her videos. She'll fry your brain. It's great.
All right, that's very cool. I mean, you think about classical pianists, violinists, all those arpeggios.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the word was invented a long time ago, and they didn't have computers.
Yeah, so she can play an arpeggio and then just have it loop, or bring it in and out of the mix as she likes. But they're all homegrown.
That's great. That's great. I love that.
She's a beast.
I love using synthesizers as much as you can as expressive instruments, real time, because ultimately that's our experience. Is like, we want to create as fast as we can think of something,
Yeah.
I am really impressed with Isotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by analyzing the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You just adjust the settings to your taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of mastery balance means you can manipulate the level of the vocal, bass, and drums even at the mastering stage. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding, but now when I send off the masters for approval, they absolutely love the way our records sound thanks to Isotope. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Lite at isotope.com. Well, what about the just the quality of the sounds? I mean, do you find that mastering the way acoustic recordings come together? I mean, you talked about, the challenges that he was going through mixing the Wayne Shorter record and Terri Lynn's drums, she producing it, you mastering it.
Right.
But with synths, sometimes I feel like the sounds are so much more, can be controlled and encapsulated and sort of pure at times too, which can be really pleasant to work with, because then you're like, wow, listen, sometimes I hear it and I'm just like, that just sounds great, just like that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times they'll run them through some grungy little boxes, or even just through a Neve preamp, right? Get some of that transformer saturation in it, and that can really warm up a cold synth sound quite a bit. And the one thing you have to worry about, especially with older synths, and if you have a collection, your song is built around them, is the noise floor. You really have to watch that, because they're not quiet machines generally. They're built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we were still working with tape then. So the noise, a noise floor of 60 to 70 dB is not a real problem with tape, because it's kind of down there anyway. But if you start taking those same instruments and working in the digital realm, well, all of that's captured and compounded.
Right.
So, but it's you can go in there with the RX again with each of them, and you remove noise floor or 60 hertz hum or whatever weirdness the synthesizer is doing that day, and they're complex beasts, and they can be affected by temperature, age of the components, all of these different things. They need to be put back in tune and checked all the time. They can drift a bit, but that's a big challenge. So, but you also don't want to overdo the denoising, right? You don't want to take the life out of it. That's part of what's awesome about it. But you can be careful and smart about it.
So don't sweat the noise too much.
Nah, don't sweat the noise. I mean, we've got RX in our arsenals, so we can handle a lot of stuff that comes at us. But what's interesting is I end up mixing and mastering a lot of this stuff. For some reason, I'm getting a lot of mix requests. I think people just hear my work with Lisa and want me to go for it. So that's been really fun. So I get to mix a bit of that, and some of the Lisa videos, they will have shot the video, and I get to mix it to video. And that's a real treat. I love
that's
doing
fun.
that. So
that's fun.
So fun.
So I mean, what kind of stuff are you actually looking at in a synth mix?
Yeah.
I think about mixing to video for a live band performance, and sometimes that means if the camera's, pivoting over to get a shot of the lead guitar player, you need to bring up the lead guitar so that it sort of like comes into focus audibly. Is it similar in the synth stuff that you're doing when you talk about mixing to picture?
I did do some of that, because there were, I can remember a very specific part of one of her videos where she starts a drum machine pattern with her finger, and I made sure to have that be more present in the mix. To match the video, because they zoom right in on her finger. They I mean, you got to do something, something fun there. So that's cool. But mixing a synth album's kind of just like mixing any other album. You're trying to get stuff out of each other's way. You're trying to focus on the core element of that sound, and they can with the combination of analog synths and virtual synths, which are awesome. Not dissing virtual synths at all, but you can get some pretty thick productions, many layers of stuff. So I found that when I'm presented with a mix, they'll often just send me the Logic session. Boom, they're done. They've done the basic balancing themselves. They've handed it off to me to take it over the finish line. Very often, instead of EQing every individual synth. Let's say a pad group is 4 different synthesizers, but in a subgroup or a folder itself. Well, it's just better to EQ that folder in most cases, is to
Right.
treat them all as one instrument. Keep the balance the same. That way you don't mess the balance up between them as much either. So you can go in there, and that's just a nice way to get that work done and not have to spin a lot of wheels. Because I have just started with every single track. And what I've found is that I end up kind of making the same EQ adjustments because they're all sort of within the same family of sounds. I end up kind of doing the same thing 4 times instead. Well, I'll just do it once here. And then and that's less processing you're doing to the track, way less processing you're doing to the track, less phase issues you're introducing. Just makes sense to mix that way. So I like to do that when I can.
Well, you're knocking out more decisions at once too, because if you're doing them individually, you're adjusting, and it's like, I don't know, is it making a change? I still got all those other ones in there. I've been doing the same concept with background vocals. So if I stack background vocals with in the studio recording with my band, I usually start out with something on each voice, and then I'll just throw it into a folder track, disable all the plugins on the individual tracks, and just put them on the group. And it just makes it easy to just kind of carve the whole thing all at once and get a sense of like, how should this all really sit in the mix? And
way easier, way faster.
Making bolder decisions that way too, actually.
I agree.
So that's a good tip. Now, are you like a synth fan yourself? Have you discovered any particular virtual synths that get you excited, or are you not creating? Okay, go.
Yes. So the newest one, and it's a very new synthesizer. It's a virtual synthesizer, also made by Moog. It's called the Mariana.
Oh,
and
cool.
It's a bass synthesizer. And it's funny. I did I mastered the audio for their little commercial for it, and it's got the guy from Bob's Burgers narrating it. It's hilarious. It's really neat. But that is it's a plugin for use in a DAW, and it also runs on an iPad. So you run this great little bass synthesizer. It's crazy, just tons of stuff. So that's kind of my favorite new little synth.
They've been making killer iOS synths for ages.
Nailing it.
I've got some, but my challenge was always, it was on my iPhone, and I'm playing with them like, this is so cool, but I never sort of got it out of my iPhone onto something else. In fact, the first time I tried to do that in the studio, I was just like, oh, screw it. I'm just going to take the SM7 vocal mic and stick it on my phone speaker and just play this damn thing, What are some of the smart ways you've seen people interact an iOS synth into a recording? Any tips there, or is it too dumb a question?
No, I guess I just don't get a lot of that. So having spent maybe the last 10 years focusing on mastering, I've kind of gotten out of a lot of the day-to-day production stuff. And I still do some production every once in a while. Somebody will ask me, or won't take no for an answer. And I end up doing it and have a lot of fun, but I really love coming back to my cozy little mastering world.
Yeah. Well, so Rockstars, if you got any tips for that, and there is a comment somewhere below this podcast, maybe you're on YouTube or something, drop a comment and let us know if you figured out a great way to get the audio out of your iOS apps into your desktop session for, producing that way. That'd be cool.
I think I just use a little 1/8-inch connector or something.
Right. Yeah. Or a little adapter.
There's got to be a better way.
I mean, now the lightning cable is like passe, and we're moving into the USB-C world.
Does Source Connect work on my iPad? Can I just Source Connect it into my DAW?
I'll find out.
We'll find out. Yeah. I just met those guys at NAMM a few days ago, so I'll reach out to them. Hey.
Okay, cool. Right on. Well, so I'll follow it all with this question. Is it worth it all? And of course, I'm referring to the remix EP that you did for Jeffrey Osborne with smooth vocals and beautiful Rhodes keys on it. Tell us about that project.
Oh, that's a great one. That was sent to me from my buddy Will Wakefield, who's the A&R head for Mac Avenue Records. And Jeffrey was signed to them, and they had recorded a sort of a more sparse R&B album. They're known for a lot of smoother jazz kind of stuff, and he's solidly R&B. So this is a really interesting mashup for them. So they end up, so they did this album, and then they wanted to have a little more grooving version of some of the songs, so that they could sell it on in different formats. So they made a remix EP of maybe 4 or 5 of the songs. Had some, I don't even know who did the remixes, but they were really good. And so those were sent to me to master. So I mastered this remix album for them, and it did it charted on Billboard for him, and did really well. I think great. It was the first time he'd been on Billboard, for probably decades.
What about smooth jazz, R&B tonality and production translates to you making any unique choices in mastering?
Right. Well, it depends on how much the rhythm instruments are getting involved in it. And for especially for a remix album, you're going to approach that much more differently than if it were just the bass, piano, and vocals of some of the songs that might have been on the album. So that, they're totally different approaches there. And I did not master the album itself. I got to do the remix. But
okay, cool.
Love that.
All right, groovy. Well, let's see. Here's another artist that you work with, Cien Fu, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, Cien Fu.
Yeah. Life in the Tropics. Great, punchy in your face pop dance track. Very like leap, leaning through the speakers kind of sound.
Yeah.
The guitars sound so wide and forward. How do you manage stereo width and perceived loudness in mastering?
Ooh, I got a good one for you, rock stars. So when you're trying to push a lot of elements, that's a really funky mix too. And shout out to my buddy Juan Carlos in Panama, who has a studio out there and is just killing it. So I get a lot of work from him, and I think he sent me this track. I believe he mixed it. But a really interesting trick for getting width and without stepping on the vocals is a little mid-side trick, right? So in the and I have a couple of buttons built into my Rupert Neve Designs master bus processor. That's what I use this for. It's got a little section on the end of it that allows you to engage the mids or the sides, either use them simply to raise or lower the mids or sides, or you can engage an EQ button, and each of the mid and the side has 4 different EQ points with curves preset curves, but each of them addresses a different area: high frequency, high mids, lows. And so for each of the mids and the highs, you can make these adjustments. Well, I just love this tool. It's great. And so what I'll often do is put the mid side, the mid section of it, and choose the high mids frequency. And you can do this with any EQ, a digital EQ. I just really like the way this thing works. Yeah. But you focus on the vocal range in the mids, and you give it a little nudge. And then on the sides, you can do the same thing and tuck it in just a little bit. So you don't have that gives you the opportunity to push the sides up a little more, right, and have a big, more exciting mix. Have it feel wider, and have it step on the vocals less.
That's totally what that record sounds like. That's exactly it. And it's something that it just reminds me, again, I'm bringing up background vocals because I was doing a lot of that recently. And I was very attentive and aware of like, okay, we've got this lead vocal. It's great. I can't help myself. So I love to like stack the hell out of background vocals and throw it in there because it's a cool thing. But then immediately as you bring it up, a first response is like, oh, that's too loud. And what I like about what you're describing is sometimes you do want the wide background things to be loud, but really the challenge is I just don't want it to compete with our attention in the center. And that's a cool strategy for approaching mid-side, where you're just, instead of thinking about like, where's the problems? It's more like, where do I want my attention to go?
Right. Yeah, and it goes just down to balance, really. You want to make sure that lead vocal stays front and center and that nothing distracts you from it. And that's a great way, because very often you'll hear something in the left or the right will draw your ear away.
Right.
And if you have if you are able to cut in the vocal frequency on those sides, obviously our ears are more sensitive to those areas. So even just a small cut in the sides really allows the vocals in the middle to shine. You don't even have to do a vocal boost if you want to. You could just do that little, just a little dip, even just a quarter or a half dB there. I mean, from the mastering side of things, in mixing, you can go a lot.
Yeah,
you can go crazier. but on my end, if I just take a quarter or a half dB down and on the sides in that vocal range, boom, the vocal pops right out, and that guitar squeak or synth swirl or something off on the side isn't drawing my ear to it as hard.
When F. Reed Shippen was on the podcast, he once said, "If you're not getting fired, you're not trying hard enough as a mixer."
Mm-hmm.
Does that same philosophy apply to mastering, or is it like, does it get inverted somehow?
No, it feels a little different to me because by the time you're handed the project, it's been approved by everybody,
Right.
And so it's just my job not to screw it up.
Right.
For the most part. And, when you're dealing with the record at that high a level, it's really easy to spook people, either label people or the artist or the mix engineer. So that reminds me of a story that Billy Stull, a mastering engineer down in South Padre Island here in Texas, mentioned. I remember seeing a video where he's working with... who's the guy that did all the Led Zeppelin engineering stuff? Andy
Johns.
Andy Johns, Glenn Johns' brother. So he gets a call from Andy. He masters the record, just kind of does what he does to it. And, which is to dig in. Billy will tell you he's not afraid to dig in and do what needs to be done to a record to get it done. And so he did that. He gave the record back to Andy Johns and the client, and he didn't like the fact that it had been altered as much. And so Billy had gone in there and tweaked it a bit. So he didn't like it. He had told the client that he didn't like it, and but later came to really love and appreciate Billy's work. But it was too late. He said, "I already spooked the client. I'm sorry. We're going to move forward. But I have more projects for you." So it kind of
Wow.
it kind of got him in trouble, but also got him more work and endeared him to Andy Johns too. So that was a fun little story.
Do you feel like all the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mixing process I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that the Ultimate Mix Mixing Masterclass will take your mixes to the next level. That if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick, and I'll save a seat for you at the front row table at the Grammys. Well, it's interesting to think about this concept of producing and creating musical ideas in the studio, and how you learn that there's many possible good ideas to try, and you got to try one, and once you and if you got to let go of something and move on, you just do, and it's going to be okay. And it almost sounds like you're describing that at this sort of like critical top level. Like it can even exist up in there. It's like it might have been a great version of something, but we moved on and it's okay. And we're going to do a different version and we'll be back.
Yeah. So that's sort of the danger of working at this level, is that, you're the gatekeeper for this project. You're the very last person that touches it.
Yeah.
So, if you don't want to make the client mad, you don't want to overstep your bounds, you don't want to take too many risks with something. And sometimes there isn't time in the release schedule for revisions or for many revisions. You just have to be very, very careful.
Right.
So yeah,
even
less
if you could go back and forth and keep tweaking, there isn't even room for that at this stage. So
right. It might have to, we got to release it, it's got to go. Yeah. So you don't have a lot of time. So you just have to be very careful, very judicious. Sometimes it's, they don't care when they get it. They're just happy that you're working on it. They're happy that you care about it so much. They might have revisions, and there's a lot of time to deal with it, but sometimes there's not. But yeah. you have to gauge the situation. And I know that happens at every level of the production stage, recording, mixing, all of that. We're all dealing with sort of the same issues, but when you get to this point, you really have to, try not to take too many chances that will maybe get you in trouble.
Okay.
We're not all Billy Stell.
So you're not trying to get fired at the mastering stage, like the mixing stage, but you used the word gauge to gauge something. So do you still have a process of gauging results for yourself? You've got these beautiful new setup with your big SAM 57 speakers in your big room. But what about the car jam? It's the car jam. Was it ever meaningful to you? Is it still meaningful to you? And do you have other listening tests that you use at a mastering stage to help make sure that you've got everything right where you want it?
Sure. The car test has always been something that's big, that's been helpful. I do it less and less these days, almost never at this point, because I've got my room dialed in. I know that I can trust it. But I will still, I will still put a master either that's proposed or one that I've just sent off to the client and play it in the car. And sometimes I will absolutely do that. Other tools that I use are my iPhone. Just play it on the iPhone. That's the new NS10. If it
just on the iPhone speaker.
Yeah, just the iPhone speaker. Make sure that I can hear all the elements. When you're playing something, and especially low, and listening low is a great way to check something out. It really helps you hear whether the vocal is present as it should be, and whether anything else is competing with it. If it becomes really evident when you listen to something low where those vocals are sitting. So that's a great trick as well.
What are some of the things that you would identify as having gone wrong when you listen on an iPhone speaker? And also, do you or should you be able to turn the speaker up all the way on the iPhone? Is that even a fair question?
I don't know. Well, that's part of my car test, right? Is cranking it, but I'll also in the car mess with the EQ. Put the bass all the way up. Put the treble all the way up. Put the bass up and the treble down. Put the treble up and the bass down. In the car. So I'll try to listen to it in the extremes where somebody's got their EQ set, you know. So and I'll listen to it loud in those places. It should still resemble your mix and master when you do that. And if it doesn't, there's you could be a problem. You could have a problem. But that's a neat test. I don't just play it in the car. I will mess with the EQ and see how extreme I can get before the master or the mix falls apart.
Right on. So let me see. Let's jump back. Let's stay on that topic for a second and continue talking about monitors. What can you teach us about how to set our monitor levels correctly for both mixing and mastering? And by levels, I'm talking about, you discussed earlier activating the room at different volumes.
Right.
I know that in a mastering situation, it's possible that your answer could be, I only listen at 2 levels or something. I've heard that sort of thing before. I would say, whether that's true or not, I would say that you probably are aware of, my guess is that you're very aware of the levels you're listening at. And does that also apply to us in the mixing stage? Or what, do you know what I'm getting at with the question?
Sure.
Just like SPL in the room kind of thing.
Yeah. So when I'm setting my room up, and I will generally aim for that 83 dB, 85 dB point, to make sure it's flat in that area. That's where that Fletcher-Munson curve sort of lives, so I'll make sure.
So 83 dB SPL, the actual sound pressure level in the room coming out of the speakers.
Yeah, I will have a mic in the room that is looking at both the SPL and the frequency spectrum. So what I'll do is when I'm setting up the tops, this is a great way to set up your subs and pair your subs with your tops. Is you'll run some white pink noise on the tops. You'll set 85 dB. You'll run the same thing on the bottoms. Set that to 85 dB. And there's a really cool setup, super simple monitor plus sub setup guide that KRK wrote. So it's in one of their PDFs. It's super easy to find, but it gives you a really a pretty easy way to get a nice tuned room, because as you know, once you add a subwoofer, you're adding a completely different dimension to your sound, and you can easily screw it up. Adding a subwoofer can do as much or more damage than be a benefit, right? If the phase is off, if the level's off, if the crossover point is wrong, all of these things. So this little guide from KRK, the
position in the room is wrong.
Yeah, and the position. So this little funky little KRK guide is super helpful, and Focal's got some really cool guides where they show you just how far to have your speakers against or away from the back wall, and how that affects your sound too. So there's all of this involved. But yes, so I'm normally going with 85 to 83 SPL here when I set things up. Not that I always listen at that level. That's probably, the higher range of what I listen to. But most of the time it's lower. But I know that when I'm in that Fletcher-Munson sweet spot, that my speakers are tuned for that.
Right. And
I
it's
don't know if that
interesting
answers
that you
your
said,
question or not.
Well, I think it helps. Yeah. So you pointed out that at that volume, you're trying to measure so that your room is essentially as flat as you can get it.
Right.
For the highs, from the highs to the low. And of course, the Fletcher-Munson curve means that our ears, as we turn it up louder, our ears are now going to hear more bass and more treble. As we turn it down quieter, our ears are going to hear less bass and treble and more mid-range. And that's one of the the points you were making too. Listening really quietly, the beauty of that is it lets us primarily just focus on the mid-range.
Exactly.
No distractions.
Exactly. Because that's also what you hear from far away. That's the except for extreme bass, which travels, through oceans,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing that you hear are the vocals from across the parking lot or in a grocery store. You're just hearing those mid-ranges frequencies. So they're super, super important. But okay, here's a challenge to hardware manufacturers and monitor controller manufacturers to factor the Fletcher-Munson curve into your levels. So wouldn't it be cool to be able to turn down your monitor controller from 83 and have it just sort of affect the levels of the bass and the highs and maybe correct for that Fletcher-Munson curve?
Maybe. I don't. Sometimes I wonder if car stereos already have that built in.
They might.
I don't know.
I would like to see that.
Yeah,
I would like to see that because otherwise, if you have it set up, have your balances for your subs and tops set up great at 83, when you move away from that, there's no compensation for it. So I'd like to see some compensation.
I think my old Nakamichi receiver had instead of a push button loudness curve, it had a variable loudness curve. So you just and I just kind of like adjust it.
That's
and what's
perfect.
so funny
yeah.
is like back then I just was like I was adjusting like what do I like, and which really is where it ends up. But it's sort of funny to like talk about it 30 years later and actually understand what the hell it's doing.
Yeah, that's a really neat feature. But I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that because then I can listen at a lower level and still get an even. Maybe I still want an even frequency response.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to listen low to the full frequency response. So it probably exists somewhere, but I haven't seen it.
Well, the cool thing about working that way for monitoring is then you might balance bass in the mix at a low frequency level where you're like, that sounds pretty good like that down there. And if you don't compensate with that loudness curve at the low level, then you're going to compensate by actually just mixing the bass really loud.
That's right.
Because when I work, I'll try and balance things for hearing the mid-range at low levels, but then to judge the bass, I got to crank it up again. And if I had mixed the bass loud down low and you crank it up, you're like, kaboom.
Yeah, blow my face off, right?
Yeah, blow my face off.
So that's the challenge, yeah.
Let me talk about, do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, bring it on.
Okay, great. So let me talk about, this, the new world of digital. We have things like spectral dynamic EQ, isotope spectral shaper, OX sound, spiff and soothe, sound theory, Gullfoss, these kind of, ever moving multiple band treatments of sound. I use them all. I've been using isotope a ton in my own mastering, the self-mastering adventures. And it's really fun to discover all this stuff and try and figure out like, okay, how am I really using this? Is that part of your mastering lexicon? I'm going to use a fancy word.
I will
or is
say
this stuff that you stay away from?
I will. Soothe comes in handy about twice a year, but when it does, it's the thing. It fixed the problem, and so I don't have it on everything, but it is handy.
And at mixing stage or at a mastering stage? Mastering stage,
yeah. If there's a little resonance that's bugging something, or like a cymbal tinge or twing, you can zero in on that a little bit. That's and I know that so in the mixing stage, I'll use the FabFilter Pro Q3, the same one I'll use in mastering, except when you use it in less than the highest oversampling rate, you have access to the dynamic section of each of those frequency points. So that's just super handy, especially if you're trying to, bust through those subgroup areas and do some quick EQ and do some quick control. You can just say, right, well, this section's, 2 dB too loud, so you do that, but then you also engage the dynamic section because maybe in some section it goes even, it gets even more out of control, but that can just keep it in place for you. So I guess I use those dynamic controls in that way.
And so that's very cool. So that also reminds me to ask you, because you mentioned stepping it back from the highest oversampling. Do you have any tips for what sort of starting EQ we want to do, regardless of brand? Like, is there a starting EQ setting? Always use the highest res, or always use the phase?
Most phase, linear phase.
Linear phase, yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any go-to starting settings we should know about?
For mastering, I'll normally work at the highest or near the highest oversampling rate. and in linear phase. But you probably know when you deal with linear phase, you can get some bass, some phantom bass stuff happening. Great on the high end, but on the low end, it can cause some problems. So you kind of have to watch what kind of material you're using linear phase EQs on, because it can muddy the bass up.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins and Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. What genres of music pop to mind right away? Where if you were in linear and you're doing the bass, you'd be like, okay, time to switch over to, and what
dynamic.
would you switch to, like dynamic or analog or one of those?
Right. That'll normally be the thing that I flip down to is minimum phase, or I think on the Pro Q3, it's I think it's dynamic or something in the middle. So
Right,
I'll normally do that. I'll never run in the zero latency mode.
Right. So is this, are we more likely to run into these low end issues if we're working on bass heavy hip hop and those kinds of records?
Right. And using linear phase to EQ the low end. It's okay to use linear phase on a bass heavy track, but you may just keep it on the mids and the highs, and maybe use, a typical analog EQ is a minimum phase, style. So that's great. Use that for any low end EQing, but you might find that, EQing in the low end with linear phase might muddy things up a little bit. Do the opposite of what you want.
Cool. Okay, here's one last question, then we'll kind of go to our closing.
Sure.
But how does streaming level matching for streaming services affect how you make decisions about delivering masters and getting things to sound just right or loud enough?
Yeah, so I'll normally target, depending on the genre of music. If it's rock and roll and pop and stuff, I'll go for the -8 and -9 LUFS very often if I'm not hearing too much crunchiness coming from the limiter or losing too much life. And that's a really good competitive level. Obviously, you don't want to use that for jazz or anything else, but for a lot of stuff. And then certain genres, they want it louder than that. But for the most part, I don't sweat the streaming services. Again, they're a moving target. They're changing their standards all the time. Something that I might have done to address their standard 1 year will totally not be applicable 2 years down the line. And so, that's not going to apply anymore. So I don't spend a lot of time on that. I do, however, because I'm a certified Apple Digital Masters provider, you have to work to a certain standard, and that's no true peaks over -1.0 dB full scale. You can't have it. That's the biggie right there. And then
is there a catch? Is there a catcher's mitt for that plugin?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, good. There is. So after my regular limiter and after I'll print the other passes, when I make my my Apple Digital Masters, I will use the TDR limiter and Tokyo Dawn Labs. their limiter. And I got this trick from Justin Perkins, who's a really big Wavelab advocate, super good mastering engineer. He runs the Mystery Room mastering. And I got that tip from him. So I'll run that when I do renders. Okay, so I'll normally set my limiter to negative 0.1 dB for my DMG limitless, and I print it at a floating point bit depth, so it's not a big deal. But then I will, when I have to do an Apple Digital Master, I will take that same print, lower it negative 0.9 dB, and that gets those peaks down to -1, right? And then you can put this TDR limiter on it, and that is and you can, I mean, it has a lot of functions to it, but you can enable and disable them, and I just leave the True Peak limiter on for that.
Okay, cool.
Justin brought that to my attention. It's just a really good sounding. A lot of people don't like the sound of True Peak limiting, and I have to agree. On certain limiters, when you turn it on, it just loses life and loses energy. So you have to be really, a little bit picky, So I find that this is really transparent and does that job. And I've already brought the mix down a little bit so that I'm not smashing against that -1 dB wall really hard. I'm bringing the whole thing down, and that way it's just, getting the odd True Peak that's coming through. But you have to do that to deliver Apple Digital Masters.
That's cool. And then very quickly, Rock says the True Peak is essentially saying the digital ones and zeros are telling the level to go up, 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 up. And then it's saying, okay, this is the top of the level. But in the real world reproduction, the circuit kind of continues a little bit and overshoots. And so the true peak of the sound is above where the top of the digital waveform is, which if I'm saying that right, we don't have to go too deep into it, but essentially it's just saying like, you need a little more headroom. So
that's right. And what they're trying to do is Apple's trying to future-proof their catalog.
Yeah.
By keeping those peaks as far away from 0 dB full scale as possible. Again, mostly because when that high resolution file gets downsampled, say to 1644 CD level or MP3 or at any level from where it is, that conversion process creates peaks above the original ones. That conversion process goes over it. So what they're doing is giving themselves one entire dB for those conversion peaks to just live in there and not cause a problem on somebody's playback system. All
right. I see. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So
I guess that's kind of what I was saying, but different, but it's the same idea. It's like, you got to leave that extra, you need more headroom.
You do. Yeah. Because when those digital waveforms are rebuilt, just because they're hitting 0, it doesn't mean that the top of the recreated peak waveform, that's going to be created in analog, and it could sound pretty messy to some converters that can't handle it.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, so let me take you to our closing question, Harold. We're going to take the, this one's hypothetical, and we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, which is also a potential name for the podcast studio, my new one. It's either that or Ready to Rock Studios, or it's Poddamit, or it's Podzilla. We're working on it still.
I like Poddamit.
And so you're going to go back in time and you're going to find young Harold and say, listen, yo, Harold, I've still got the hair. You're going to say that first. You're going to just brag about the fact that you
don't worry about the hair.
Youthful hair. Don't worry about the hair.
It's covered.
And you say, but do worry about this. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to become a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
Well, I've got 2.
Okay.
The first one is I had no mentors. So there was nobody around me or in my immediate circle that was doing any sort of professional level recording. I didn't know of any recording studios in my area. My focus was on something else. I was actually studying computer science and stuff.
Were you in Columbus then, or is this a different?
No, I was in southern Michigan, where I'm from. So, I didn't know that recording was going to be my passion or my direction. I was focused on other careers. But had I been smart, I would have picked up that phone book. We had phone books at the time. And looked for local studios. I'm sure there were a ton of them that were doing radio jingles and doing other work that I just was not aware of. I mean, that's the biggest thing is you have no idea sometimes what's happening in your city or around you that would really surprise you. So I didn't even know that was an opportunity. I was just doing my thing and self-taught because I didn't do that. So I self-taught myself pretty much the whole way. When I didn't, so the second one is something I learned when I stopped, when I put my learning in someone else's hand. I think I mentioned this on the last podcast. I did a workshop with Ronan Chris Murphy out in LA.
Yeah.
Spent a week with him. And that's the other one, is the focus on the front end. That was really, and this is when I was primarily focused on recording and mixing. Mm-hmm. So it was focused on that front end. Had I known that, gosh, I would have focused on getting some amazing preamps, holding on to the great microphones that I did. Of course, I wanted all the digital effects and, all the things. But had I spent my time just focusing on getting it, capturing the best sound possible, once you get it, then you can work from it from there. But, just emphasis on the front end, the quality of the room, the mic placement, the microphone, the preamp. And, those are the heavy ones.
Create the right sound to begin with.
That's right. Get it right at the mic.
Get it right. Yeah, well, as Joe Gilder likes to say, gearats or gearats, get it right at the source.
There you go.
Gear at 'em. Get it right at the mic. Get at 'em, rock stars. Well, Harold, thanks for hanging with us again, man. Good to see you, dude. Let the rock stars know, where can they go find more about you? What if they got a hot mix that's just burning a hole in their stereo and they need to get it mastered? How should they reach out to you?
Okay, hit me up at, you can go to my webpage, which is haroldlaruemastering.com. And there are some email links and some biography links and things from there. You can also find me on Instagram. I think it's at Harold LaRue Mastering there. And I'm also on Facebook. So I can get messages on all of those platforms. Operators are standing by.
Operators are standing by. Pro tip, rockstars, if you reach out to somebody on Instagram or Facebook and you're a bad typer like me, you can just press the microphone button and say hello audibly with audio.
Ding.
Kind of a nice way to send messages. Well, Harold, thanks for hanging with us, dude. Look forward to seeing you around the studio again. And rockstars, thank you for listening. Harold, good to see you, dude.
Likewise. Good to see you, Lidge. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, our pleasure, man. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.